Tom, thanks so much for joining me after your session here at the SportsPro Investment Summit.
Pleasure.
Obviously, when I look around the lanyards at this event, it's quite clear that there's all sorts of different entities investing in sport these days. Private equity, sovereign wealth funds, family offices, etc. I won't list them all. But where does BSG kind of sit within that ecosystem?
It's interesting you say that, because I can tell by the type of language that people use.
Right.
So you can listen to the private equity guy or the advisor or the agency, and everybody's using their own slight flavour of ice cream that is now sports investment, which is this amazing gelateria.
Yeah.
But BSG, we're owner-operators of businesses, so we have private capital, and we utilise that private capital to invest into the sports space. Our thesis is traditionally into league-level IP and underserviced fandom, specifically in fandom that you don't necessarily have to create the people. The people are already there, but they're not necessarily being serviced in the most modern ways. We do have an anomaly to that rule in that we have a very large football club that's just been promoted to the Premier League, but where that ticks towards is it comes back to the tribal fandom piece. Sunderland has one of the most tribal fan groups in England, certainly, and how we are moving fans and what we put fans at the very heart of what we do is the decision-making process that we have across all our investments, and specifically leagues, and in Sunderland's case, a club.
Sure. So is that kind of how you would evaluate an investment opportunity? Then it's kind of that tribal side of things.
We're not necessarily interested in creating a new fan from scratch if they don't exist. Supplementing fans, bringing fans, moving fans, creating new fans that are adjacent to fans that are already there. Absolutely, that is exactly the core of who we are and what we're trying to do. But if when we look at some of the startup leagues and innovations, whilst they might be great, if they're at a situation where they're like, where's your sporting integrity tribal fan, the person that's like, it doesn't matter whether it's raining or sunny, it doesn't matter what my distribution model is, it doesn't matter how I'm going to consume it, I'm going to consume it. We want to see them at the heart of it, and then we'll grow that sort of nucleus.
Sure. I guess maybe using one of the, I suppose, the other property within your portfolio at the moment, the World Supercross Championship, is the example. Kind of how did that kind of apply there, I guess? Yeah.
So I suppose if you actually take a step back and look at dirt biking in general, dirt biking is an enormous sport, and funny enough, not necessarily in the UK, but certainly in some of the really big markets around the world, US, France, Australia, certainly in Latin America. And it's a huge sport in two ways. It's huge from a competitor watching TV media, whether that's AMA Supercross in the US, whether that's MXGP as the kind of global outdoor championships. It's also a participation sport. So there's Mummers of Moto, for example, where they are taking little Johnny or little Sarah down to the sort of local park, and they're beginning to learn how to be motocross. And we sort of saw that. We saw the huge level of engagement that was taking place, but it was really transactional. It was really like ticket-based. It was really simplistic in the way that a lot of the media was created and a lot of the storytelling was done. And our view was like, how can we apply much of the techniques and the innovations that you've seen in other sports, certainly not trying to kind of rewrite the rules here, that others were already doing within a stadium, right? So there's a beauty of World Supercross is that ultimately it's a motorsport product taking place within a stadium, which of course immediately gives you a different way of doing fan experience. It gives you great hospitality. It gives you the ability to have supplementary events and content and entertainment that sits around it because you're in the stadium. And that's the beauty of this, is because we're not sitting on Silverstone or Brands Hatch or different ways of motorsport traditionally going past you very quickly. What you can is have this incredible view, and it's so visceral, closed roofs, and we just saw that as an opportunity of like how we can create a sports and entertainment product globally. And also to the point about underserviced is that AMA Supercross in the US, 15 events, incredibly successful in NFL stadiums, some of the best riders in the world. And then we've got this other audiences which were really large that didn't have those events. So really it's applying much of what we've spoken about and servicing those tribal fans that actually hadn't had the opportunity in the past. Yeah, sure. Is that is the approach that you've taken there something you can see yourselves, lifting and applying to other sports as well? Absolutely. Look, I think there are a number of sort of global circus sports or sort of global circus opportunities where you've got pockets of really tribal fans across the continents of the sport, and you can apply that model. We at BSG at the moment are incubating and launching in 2026 the first ever Rugby Sevens franchise league. Rugby Sevens is a it's a sport I've got a lot of history with, but equally it's incredible, right? Rugby invented its short form version of the sport hundreds of years before the other mainstream sports had done 2020 and so on. But at the very top of the sport, they'd also created a situation where to go and watch that takes 3 days. So you might be on Friday morning, you watch the first game, final's not until Sunday, and that kind of broke the distribution model for media, broke storytelling, means that actually the costs of doing so were that ticketing were not just about what takes place on the field, but you're having to create this huge festival around it. Yep. What we really want to bring it back to is short form, which is 3-4 hours on a Thursday evening with the very best v the best in a franchise model, but that supplements and supports that World Series. And that's the important thing, that Rugby Sevens is an Olympic sport, which is a huge part of the rugby family and a hugely important part of the rugby family. And World Rugby have done an amazing job for it to be there. Now, it has begun to have some cracks at the very top with the international games. So how can a franchise league actually support that kind of strategy and increase participation around the world? So while absolutely we apply those rules that we say about World Supercross and those things about fans and all of our learnings around those sports, but continue to put Rugby Sevens at the heart of those decisions alongside the fans. Sure.
What you mentioned you're incubating it at the moment. Then what phase are we at? I suppose what does the funding picture look like?
Well, actually, we just closed our seed funding round. Okay. We capitalised it at BSG to a certain level, and then we've just taken in and closed the round at a 8-figure valuation, which now means that we are fully funded and in a really, really great position to do so. The next steps are within the next 2 weeks we're out for franchise sales, whilst also continuing to develop all of the pieces that we've spoken about, which is that if our first event is in August 2026 and all of our learnings are about what fan experience should be, and whether that's at Sunderland, World Supercross or other sports around the world, how do we want to make sure that this sport is framed perfectly for the future? And you start from there and you go all the way back. So we're already in conversations about what fan engagement looks like for data. How do you use data? How does microtransactions work? What's happening in betting? How do we engage fans both on-site, off-site? How's storytelling going to work? So whilst we're selling franchises, we've also scaled the team, and the team is already working on what is preparing ultimately only 13 months away. Yeah.
So you mentioned the franchise. So is it going to be a touring model? Are these franchises going to be city-based?
Yeah. So it's interesting because we've done a huge amount of research work on where the Rugby Sevens fans are around the world, and what that means is that there are fans of the Emirates Dubai Sevens, which is for me the world's biggest Rugby Sevens tournament, 100,000 people through the door over the 3 days. But equally, are they fans of the sport, or are they fans of the fact that Stormzy is going to be headlining the main stage? And so a lot of the work that we've done is really bringing in to try and deeply understand where these pockets of Rugby Sevens fans are. Not only, and where are the kind of moving rugby fans? Sanford spoke about the size of the rugby market. Absolutely, that's true. And also the rugby fan and the rugby world over-indexes for ABC Ones and the sponsorship that goes with that. So you can't walk away from what that traditional rugby fan is, because you want to try and move as many of them as you can do. Now, clearly some will go, Rugby Sevens is not for me, especially as we're going to kind of innovate with some of the rules. Yeah. Where's the heartland? So we're likely actually to have our 7 tournaments in Europe in 2026, even though it will be a global league with franchises from around the world. What we're also really interested in, what we're exploring with IP that you would traditionally know in other sports. How can we can't say what, but let's say how can a football club compete against an NFL team via the vehicle of Rugby Sevens? And because, going back to a completely different point is, so many of these sports businesses now, as you begin to look to kind of grow your revenues and grow your fandoms, you might be capped out as where you are as a football team. You might be capped out as where you are in as a cricket team, for example. And what can you do via other sports? Whether that's just ownership groups and not the actual utilisation of particular IP, or whether in some case it is that do we get to see Team X play Team Y on a Rugby Sevens field? And then how excited can those people get if it's taking part in placing Craven Cottage on the Thames? Yeah. I think what got us here won't get us there, and innovation is not for the sake of it. The sporting integrity absolutely has to be at the heart, but one of the challenges for new IP and new sports league, and one of the challenges that I think is faced in certainly when more mainstream sports are launching new leagues, is if you go right now it is the Grizzlies versus the Liberties. What does that mean? Yeah. Like, how do you create any IP that's tangible to sell against? So given that Rugby Sevens is not where there are developed clubs already, but we're used to seeing it through the international brands, how do we ensure that there is something that you can touch and feel immediately when round one takes place potentially in Europe next year?
Sure. So I guess some of the people that you'll hopefully be speaking to over the next couple of weeks will be existing teams in other sports, but maybe some of the entities that I spoke about at the start, are they sort of the people that you'll be courting as well?
Absolutely. I mean, look, I think the reality is that in today's world, what we said at the beginning is the group that's here today, whether that's PE, whether that's advisory or agency or what have you, I think we'll be speaking to all those groups, some of them as investors, some of them as operators, some of them as investor operators such as ourselves. If you already own a stadium, for example, and you've already got a piece of IP that plays out that stadium, and maybe that IP is already across 2 or 3 different sports, then absolutely your fans are already understand, well, we're in this stadium and we understand why we're at this stadium, and you've got a few of the obstacles that are already broken down. Yeah. And that's really exciting. And what an amazing place for rugby as a sport to be, to have new IP flushing in, both in the R360, if that takes place, and in the Seven space, because the sport has faced some challenges over the past couple of years. I'm actually much more buoyant on the sport in certain markets around the world. There is a huge amount of fandom and participation that will remain at its core. It's, as to we've already spoken about, how do you service that in a different way to how it's currently being done so, and how do you frame it differently for media? Rugby Sevens is not quite large enough for players to be full-time athletes all year round. And actually what we bring is the opportunity for them to continue to play for their countries, bring franchises, and suddenly you've gone back to a model that potentially was 10 years ago where I am a professional Rugby Sevens player. Yep. And that is what my job is, and it pays me well enough to have a family. And these great athletes have got that at the very least.
Yeah, you touched on R360 before, and obviously your panel touched on it in there as well, and that's obviously seen as quite a disruptive force in rugby. I suppose, and you spoke quite glowingly about the World Sevens League. How do you kind of view yourselves in that perspective? Do you think people will see this as disruptive, or do you think?
Look, one, I think that we are complementary to the ecosystem, and I think it's really, really important that having personally spent as long as I have in Rugby Sevens, I recognise that we have to be, need to be, and want to be. And we want to put the Olympics and we want to put the World Series at the heart of what's happening. We don't want to be anti-establishment in that space. We absolutely can do things differently, and with that external private investment and the ability that we've been able to raise money at a certain valuation is based on those innovations, of which we're going to have to nurture some relationships to do so, because of course, the house traditionally does it in the way that the house does it. But we aren't coming in to disrupt and break, because I don't think this needs it in this space. I think we can continue to be the supplementary form, and I think that's the beauty of Rugby Sevens, whereas we're not dealing with the establishment in quite the same way. I believe in disruption. I believe that we've got to continue to push forward, and we've got to continue to innovate, and I'm all power to the guys that are attempting to do that, not just in rugby but in all sports. But the challenges that they may or may not face, I don't believe that a really successful franchise league in Rugby Sevens should face.
Yeah, and I mean, we've seen there's been quite a few new leagues emerge over the past sort of, since COVID, I guess especially, but even before that, we've seen new ones come up. The most successful one being probably the IPL, which has been around for more than 15 years now.
A valuation of 18 billion.
Yeah, not too bad, is it? What kind of, what gives you the confidence that this is going to be one of those that lasts the course? Because even in rugby, I think back to World 12s, for example, still waiting for that to kick off. What gives you confidence that this is going to last the course?
Look, I suppose it's how are we. One thing we recognise is that Rugby Sevens is and continues to be a hugely exciting version of the sport. So when we see that there is a short form version of the sport done it, what are we looking for? We're looking for easily consumable tidbits of action that can kind of wow people via the different media mechanisms, whether that's socials or however. How can that grab 9-year-olds, 15-year-olds, 25-year-olds, 35-year-olds, right? And absolutely that Rugby Sevens can do. Is there a tribal piece at the middle where people love rugby and it over-indexes and it does really well in the sponsorship pieces that we were already speaking about? Yes, absolutely. But we have to put the sport at its very heart. So it has to be the best versus the best. It has to be, which is what it is in the IPL, right? You know for a fact that the best cricketers are going to head there and they are going to compete each year in the IPL. I think that some of these leagues that we've seen that have not been able to be that and have not been able to immediately be competitive at the highest level tends to then be asked the question after a period of time. The entertainment begins to drift and you go, well, is this novel or is this here for a long time? So we absolutely have to put that sporting integrity at the heart, even though we might innovate with some of the rules. But these are going to be the best players in the world competing with one another, so that sporting integrity needs to be at the heart. Yeah,
you won't end up having a kind of 1v1 for the last sort of minute or two or something potentially.
No, it's probably not run it straight.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Before I let you go, Tom, obviously quite a lot on your hands at the moment with a new league and obviously Sunderland's return to the Premier League, but is there anything else on the horizon, any other sports you look at that you see kind of opportunities in further down the line?
It's interesting. I think the sports investment space has never been more interesting. Our deal flow is huge, but I think you can bracket quite a lot of it. So a lot of it's really big tickets into big stuff, which we're not interested in. Right, we want to really help operate these businesses, and just the utilisation of our capital is not where we are. We see a lot of really, really early stage stuff, and potentially too early. So it kind of means that the kind of sweet spot that we're looking at is quite small, and many of those then actually come as teams. So despite we've got this thesis about leagues, then we're looking at teams a lot of the time. What I will say is that we're in a period of high inquisition, so we continue to be really active, looks at lots of businesses, and have built an executive team with experience from sports all over the world that we know can help accelerate these businesses. So many businesses are stuck, eyes down, looking at today, and really, really well going, right, how do we run this business as it is today, and are unable to have the capital to do so or the resource to look through the telescope. That's our model. We want to kind of help these businesses look through the telescope, scale them, accelerate the opportunity. And I'm really looking forward to the next sort of 3-4 months where the group goes from rugby sevens, football and motorsports to potentially a couple more.
Cool. We'll look forward to following it. Tom,
awesome.
Thanks so much.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Cheers. Nice one.